Posted by timely_safety_3578. A house that traumatized my family. I'll start this off with a little bit of a backstory / important information. I'm a 23-year female. I now have 2 kids, but at the time of this story I only had one, a 2-year-old boy. We lived in a small 2-bedroom house. It was my son and I, my fiancé and our 2 cats. Now, I grew up in a small town with my grandparents on their farm. The property they lived on was infested with bad energy, evil spirits / demons, etc. I don't know why they stayed in that house so long. In the early 2000s their barn burnt to the ground, killing many of their horses. It was ruled spontaneous combustion. It was assumed there was some tightly baled hay that must have had bits of moisture in the middle and it caused the fire. They rebuilt in the following years. As I said, this house / property was evil. Shadow figures, horrible nightmares, weird animal deaths and so much more. I got out as soon as I could, and years later I ended up in the house that this story takes place in. It was summer of 2019, we had just bought a pool for our backyard and we were so excited to use it. We filled it up that day and I got a text from my grandparents later on letting me know that they were moving about 6 hours away and that the nice California king-size Tempur-Pedic bed from the guest room was up for grabs. I told them I'd love it and so we went to grab it. Totally interrupting our swimming plans, but that was okay. Bringing something from that house into mine was the worst mistake I ever made. That night we woke up to my 2-year-old son screaming from his room. We ran in to find him sitting up in his bed pointing to the front of his room. That's where we found a puddle, a 3ft×2ft puddle of water on his floor. It was summer, there was no rain, but we checked the roof and walls anyways for any type of leak. There was none. We checked him to make sure he didn't pee. He didn't. I smelt it, gross I know, wasn't cat pee. There was absolutely no explanation. He slept in our room that night. The next morning we seen our bathroom sink was clogged. My fiancé turned off the main water line under the sink so that no one could turn the water on, causing an accidental flood. A couple hours later we headed to the store to get stuff to unclog it. When we got back home I seen water coming from the bathroom, flooding the hallway. Both sink handles were turned on and water was pouring from the sink. We checked our security system, there's no way someone broke in. That's when I started freaking out. I didn't even understand why all of a sudden this stuff was happening. Fast forward to a couple days later. We're headed out the pool finally. As my son heads towards our door he looks up in the corner of the ceiling, immediately drops to his knees and covers his eyes and starts screaming. He told my fiancé he saw a dead girl crawling on the ceiling. I flipped, and we left the house for the day. 3 days later we have some friends over. We were drinking and hanging out. My friend had an air mattress on my son's bedroom floor and we decided we needed to head to bed. All the lights and TVs were off. 15 minutes later the TV turns on and the song Drowning by Kodak, I think, starts playing. Listen to it if you haven't. The first 30-ish seconds are what played. I went out to turn it off and the remote was dead. So no, a cat didn't step on it, nothing. I started putting pieces together. I called a medium. She told us to take the pool down immediately, that either something was trying to warn us that something bad was going to happen with the pool or something was going to try to drown my son or pets in it. I still have chills telling this story. She also said, I'm sensing you guys just brought something into your home and there is evil attached to it. You need to get rid of it now. That's when it hit me, the bed. We bought a travel trailer and moved a month and a half later. My son, now 6, still remembers the girl he's seen. Posted by timely_safety_3578. The sad shadow in our kitchen. If you haven't read my first story, I strongly recommend you read that one first for some better insight. This story takes place in my childhood home, a farm home that housed more than the living. This was one of the experiences that still gives me chills. If you walked into this house you'd see the efforts made to have it feel homely. The floor-to-ceiling windows that let in great amounts of natural light. The perfectly worn-in couches and the happy family pictures hung on the walls. But if you stayed long enough you'd realize why most of the family dreaded even a day trip there. I, about 7 at the time, had a bedroom tucked in the very end of the hall. I'm sure most of you have gotten up to get a drink in the middle of the night, right? Simple, you just sneak out of your room and tiptoe to your kitchen trying not to wake up mom and dad. For me it was much different. First I needed to muster up the courage just to pull my covers off my head. Then I would look down at the floor and run through the hallway till I reached the opening to the living room. I looked down when I ran to be sure I never glanced accidentally into the bathroom. See, the bathroom was at the opposite end of the hallway and the door was almost always left open. Inside the open door the mirror on the vanity would show me everything behind me as I came through the hallway. After I saw an apparition of woman behind me once, smiling with the most eerie smile you could imagine. That is the only way I would ever walk down that hallway again. After the hallway came the living room. I'd walk quickly through to the kitchen. The kitchen had a big center island that you would walk around to get to the fridge and the sink. The fridge had a water and ice dispenser on it, which had a light that turned on when you pressed your cup against the trigger that made it dispense. To my right was the sink, and in front of it in the dark sat what looked to be a black garbage bag. I grabbed my cup out of the cupboard next to me, and right as I lifted it to the water dispenser I hear faint sobbing sounds. I tried to brush it off and started to fill my water cup. As soon as the light comes on, it illuminates the room. I look over to the sink and the bag I'd seen was now gone. I remember jerking my hand away from the fridge unintentionally out of fear. As I did, the light went off and the bag was back. Except more defined. Now I could tell it was a dark shadow curled up in an upright fetal position. I heard the sobbing again and immediately ran back to my room. I remember that night having a dream about a woman who lost her baby. The baby got sick and passed away in its sleep, and the woman shortly after hung herself in the old shed at the far end of the property. I have no way to confirm this, but I believe the shadow I saw was her, and the dream I had was her way of telling me her story. From then on out, I'd see this sad shadow woman every night I'd get up, in the same spot, and every time I'd also hear her sobbing. She never moved or even tried to look at me. I think she were a very sad soul, kept captive by the evil spirits that controlled our house. I wish I could have helped her move on looking back at it now. Posted by Dallas Green. My time in a haunted pub. Before I get into the tales of me living above and working in a pub, I would first like to say that, before all of this, I was a non-believer. A skeptic of anything paranormal. As cliché as that may sound. Around 2006 I found myself employed at a small pub. I enjoyed it there, great friends, live music most weekends, and more importantly the banter you have while working at a pub with customers and staff alike. Before long I was promoted to assistant manager and was offered a place to live in one of the rooms above the pub, rent-free. Obviously I took the opportunity with both hands. But, this is where things started to change. After moving all of my stuff into the room in the large flat, I started to experience small things. Items going missing only to turn up in a different place a few days later, noises in the dark night, extreme cold spots throughout the flat that went away as quickly as they came. Most things I put down to the other tenants I shared the 2-story apartments with. You see, my room was located on the first floor and there was a floor above too, which had 4 rentable rooms for people to live or work from. My first encounter happened one night after closing. Whilst clearing the ashtrays in the beer garden, I heard my name being called by a familiar voice from the adjacent toilet window. It was the voice of my manager. "Come here a second," I heard. I walked back though the rear doors only to see my manager at the opposite end of the pub, a good 40 feet away, clearing tables. "Did you call me?" I asked, only to be told no in a confused tone. I shrugged it off and went back outside to carry on my duties. Then it happened again. "My name, come here a minute," from the toilet window. Again I go inside only to see my manager in the same place as I left her. I explained I heard her voice call me from the toilet. She simply looked at me and just said "ah," like she knew what was going on. She then told me of strange occurrences where people would hear her voice asking for them to come close only to find out that it wasn't actually her. I just put it down to her being a wind-up and left it at that. A couple of weeks go by with no other strangeness until, again at closing time, something more terrifying happened. I had just finished taking the drip trays from the glass wash machine and putting them back under their corresponding taps. I then went to check on the front doors to make sure they were dead bolted for the night when I heard a loud crash behind me that scared the literal hell out of me. With bated breath I slowly turned round, not expecting what to see. But, there they were, strewn across the floor, the drip trays that not 30 seconds ago I had put in their homes. I bolted for the corridor that led to the flats upstairs without once looking back. As I ran past the discarded plastic trays on the floor, it was like a wall of ice. It was deathly cold. I reached the door to the staircase and ran up as fast as I could. The corridor at the top of the stairs was long, thin and dark. With a room at the top of the stairs to the left used for local bands to come and rehearse, and the 3 rooms on the right. A small office where safe was, an empty room, and a strange toilet that looked like it belonged in a Saw movie. The whole time I ran down this 30-foot corridor I felt like I was being chased by something. I swear I heard a low guttural growl as finally reached the door to the flat. I slammed that door behind me and turned the lock. I ran to my room and slammed the door shut and locked it too. My room was directly above the bar area, and most of the night I could hear what sounded like the plastic trays being slid around, tables and chairs moving, fridge doors being slammed. I did not go down and check, there was no way I was going back down. Instead, I put in my headphones, put on some music, and just tried to ignore it. The whole time staring at my door, anticipating the turning of my door handle. I didn't speak a word of this to anyone for fear of being called crazy and having the piss took out of me. I just lived with it for a while. Safe say it took me a while to sleep that night. After we had all experienced some form of experience as staff, we decided to contact the 2 previous managers. A couple who lived there. To protect names, I'll just call them Dave and Stella. My manager used to work for Dave and Stella, and because of this we were able to arrange a meeting with them to discuss any stories they may have. We weren't disappointed. They told us they themselves did some digging into the building's history. They couldn't find a lot, but what they did find was shocking. Apparently the building is as old as the Gatehouse Theater that sits opposite. It has been rumored to have been a doctor's surgery, abortion clinic, and even hosted illegal backstreet boxing matches. Stafford has a few haunted buildings and is rich in history. Most famous would be the old Victorian High House located a couple of minutes walk away from this pub. This is a notoriously haunted building. Dave and Stella recall similar experiences to us at this pub. One tale struck me with fear regarding the long corridor leading to the flat. Dave told me a story of how he felt like he was being followed, almost ushered along by an invisible force to the top of the stairs, where Dave said he felt hands on his back, heard a deep growl, and then felt like he was pushed down the stairs. Dave broke his wrist as a result of this fall. It is entirely possible that he may have tripped, but he remained adamant that something pushed him, and having experienced a similar uncomfortable atmosphere in that corridor, I'm inclined to believe him. Trigger warning: animal injury. Stella tells us of the time when one of their dogs, a Great Dane, was spooked by something on the top floor. As a result, the poor pupper leapt through a window and crashed down to the road. Fortunately, the dog survived after having thousands of pounds spent on vet bills. We were presented with photos of the injuries and the broken window as proof of this. I literally couldn't believe it. After this, Stella, who was somewhat of a medium herself, had a priest summon into the building to investigate and bless the building. They recorded this on their phones. During the video, the priest walks through the bar, gets to the staircase and stops. Simply sighs and walks upstairs. He gets halfway down the corridor before stopping. He says he feels a force stopping him and then states he can't continue and leaves. It's a strange video from what I recall, but I believe it to be true and not some setup. They both had other tales of random noises, a strange tapping sound at the end of the bar during their closing routine. Footsteps, doors opening on their own, strange whispers, etc. They even found bones deep in the fireplaces on the top floor that hadn't been used for years and years, as they lived on the first floor and seldom went onto the top floor. I asked if it could have just been birds' bones from pigeons trapped in the chimney. They simply replied with no, these were too big. They looked like infants' bones. Don't ask me why I didn't just move out there and then. Posted by Bernry. Spooky babysitting experience. Due to a completely separate spooky child situation that we've recently experienced, my sister, 26F, was just recounting an experience that she had years ago with her then boyfriend's nephew. I remember this from the time, but it was long before I had a Reddit account, let alone any knowledge of this sub. I don't think I've ever posted on here before, but while I was just scrolling by, I thought you guys would like to hear it. When she was a late teen, my sister used to regularly babysit her partner's nephew. He was 2 or 3 years old at the time of this incident, and was going through a phase that I'm sure many people are familiar with, picking random things up and presenting them to other people. He would say take, and could get quite insistent. He was also going through some separation anxiety, and would say back when people would leave the room or house. One day they're in the living room, and he picks up a frisbee and walks to the corner of the room, and proudly presents it to thin air. Take. He crowed. Then he looks frustrated, take. Then he really starts to get upset, shaking the frisbee in front of him, stomping his feet and yelling take. Take. After a few moments, his head turns to the doorway, leading to the hallway, and he toddles in that direction, until he's standing at the foot of the stairs. He starts crying, back. Bach. Back. My sister whipped on his shoes and coat and immediately left the house, waiting hours until her partner got home.